Growing up in the shadow of Morrison Industries, I watched my parents build their empire from nothing. But when I chose to become a janitor instead of joining their corporate world, they called it the biggest disappointment of their lives. What they didn't know was that every night I spent mopping floors, I was actually building something that would make their multi-million-dollar company look like pocket change. The day I walked into their boardroom as their new owner, the look of pure shock on their faces was worth every insult they'd thrown at me. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Marcus Chen, and this story begins in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, where my parents, Richard and Patricia Morrison, had built Morrison Industries from the ground up. By the time I was born, their construction and real estate development company was already worth 8 figures, with projects spanning across 3 states. Growing up, dinner conversations revolved around profit margins, building permits, and expansion plans. My father would come home with dirt under his fingernails and concrete dust on his boots, but he wore expensive suits to every business meeting. My mother handled the financial side, turning their blue-collar beginnings into white-collar success. "Marcus," my father would say, cutting into his steak with the same precision he used to review blueprints. "Someday all of this will be yours. Morrison Industries needs a Morrison to carry it forward." But I had different plans. While other kids, my age, were playing video games or hanging out at the mall, I was fascinated by technology, not the flashy consumer stuff, but the infrastructure that made everything work. I spent hours in our basement, taking apart old computers my parents had discarded from their office, learning how networks functioned, how data moved through cables, and wireless signals. When I turned 16, instead of asking for a car like most teenagers, I asked my parents for server equipment. The look of confusion on their faces was the first sign that we weren't on the same page about my future. "Servers?" my mother asked, looking up from her laptop where she was reviewing quarterly reports. "What do you need those for?" "I want to understand how businesses really operate in the digital age," I explained. "Every company needs robust IT infrastructure, cloud solutions, data management systems." My father laughed, not unkindly, but with the dismissive chuckle of someone who'd built his fortune with hammers and hard hats. "Son, real business happens with real buildings, real materials, real customers. All that computer stuff is just overhead. They bought me a laptop instead." During my senior year of high school, while my parents assumed I was preparing applications for business school, I was actually teaching myself advanced programming languages and network architecture. I'd sneak out after they went to bed, not to party, but to attend late-night coding meetups at a local coffee shop called Binary Beans. That's where I met Jake Sullivan, a former Silicon Valley engineer who'd moved to Denver after burning out from the startup world. Jake was working as a night janitor at a large office complex downtown, but during the day, he was building something revolutionary: a cloud-based property management system that could automate everything from tenant screening to maintenance requests to financial reporting. "The real estate industry is stuck in the past," Jake explained one night over coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "These companies are still using spreadsheets for million-dollar projects, fax machines for contracts, and paper filing systems for tenant records. There's a massive opportunity here." Jake's vision was clear, but he needed help. He had the technical expertise, but lacked the industry knowledge and the manpower to scale his solution. That's when he offered me something that would change everything. "I need someone who understands both sides," he said. "Someone who knows real estate but also gets technology. I can't pay you much up front, but I can offer you equity in the company." The company was called PropTech Solutions, and Jake was offering me a 40% stake in exchange for working with him part-time while finishing high school, then full-time after graduation. When I told my parents about Jake's offer, their reaction was explosive. "You want to throw away your future to work with some janitor?" My mother's voice rose higher with each word. Marcus, you're talking about turning down college, turning down joining Morrison Industries. To do what exactly? Clean buildings? My father was more direct. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You're going to waste your potential. Working a minimum wage job with some failed tech worker who couldn't make it in the real world. It's not just janitorial work, I tried to explain. Jake is a brilliant engineer, and we're building software that could transform the entire industry. Software doesn't build houses, my father shot back. Software doesn't create jobs for hundreds of people. Software is just expensive overhead that real businesses have to deal with. The argument escalated until my mother delivered the ultimatum. That would define the next several years of our relationship. If you take this ridiculous job, don't expect any support from us. Not financial, not emotional, nothing. You'll be on your own. I was 18 years old, standing in the kitchen of our 6-bedroom house, looking at parents who'd given me every material advantage but couldn't understand the one thing I was passionate about. The decision should have been impossible. Instead, it was surprisingly easy. "I'm taking the job," I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went pale, then red, then pale again. My father just shook his head slowly, like he was watching a car accident in slow motion. "Then you're making the biggest mistake of your life," my mother finally said. "And when you come crawling back, begging for help, remember that we tried to stop you from destroying your future." 2 weeks later, I moved into a small studio apartment across town, furnished with hand-me-down furniture from garage sales and a determination to prove that their cheap job was actually the foundation of something extraordinary. My first day at PropTech Solutions was nothing like what my parents imagined. Yes, technically I was employed by the janitorial company that Jake worked for, which gave us access to dozens of office buildings after hours. But while Jake cleaned offices and emptied trash cans, I was installing network monitoring equipment, conducting site surveys for our property management software, and building relationships with building managers who were frustrated with their current systems. The beauty of our setup was that nobody suspected what we were really doing. Property managers and business owners saw us as just the cleaning crew, which meant they spoke freely about their problems, their inefficiencies, their wish lists for better systems. We were gathering market research while mopping floors. Within 6 months, we had our first beta client, a mid-sized property management company that oversaw 47 apartment complexes across Denver and Colorado Springs. They agreed to let us implement our system in exchange for 3 months of free janitorial services and a promise that if our software didn't improve their efficiency by at least 20%, we'd refund their setup costs. Our software didn't just improve their efficiency by 20%. It improved it by 67%. Suddenly, we had paying customers, real revenue. And most importantly, we had proof that our concept worked. But my parents remained unimpressed. "So you're running a cleaning business now?" my father asked during one of our rare phone conversations. "Marcus, Morrison Industries did $4 million in revenue last quarter. How much did your little computer project make?" At that time, PropTech Solutions was generating about $12,000 per month in recurring revenue. Compared to my parents' established business, it was insignificant. But what my father didn't understand was the difference between linear growth and exponential growth. Morrison Industries had to bid on each new project, hire more workers for each expansion, purchase more equipment for each job. Their growth was tied directly to physical resources and human capital. PropTech Solutions, on the other hand, could scale infinitely once our software was perfected. Each new client required minimal additional resources. Our profit margins were growing higher every month, and our client retention rate was approaching 95%. By my second year, we'd expanded beyond property management into general business automation for real estate companies. We were handling everything from client relationship management to financial reporting to project timeline tracking. Companies that had been drowning in paperwork were suddenly operating with the efficiency of organizations twice their size. But, to my parents, I was still just Marcus, the disappointment who chose to empty trash cans instead of learning the family business. The breakthrough came in year 3, when Jake and I realized that our greatest competitive advantage wasn't just our software. It was our unique position as the invisible observers of the real estate industry. We'd spent thousands of hours in dozens of different companies, watching how they operated, identifying inefficiencies that even the business owners hadn't noticed. We decided to pivot from being just a software company to becoming a full-service real estate technology consultant firm. We would come in, analyze a company's operations from top to bottom, implement our custom software solutions, and then provide ongoing support and optimization. Our first major consulting contract was with a real estate development firm in Phoenix that was struggling with project delays and cost overruns. Within 6 months, we'd streamlined their processes so effectively that they were completing projects 15% faster and 12% under budget. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Word spread quickly in the industry. Other developers started reaching out, wanting to know how we'd achieved such dramatic improvements. Our consulting fees went from $5,000 per project to $50,000 per project. By the end of year 3, PropTech Solutions was generating $1.2 million in annual revenue. And still, my parents saw me as their son who'd chosen to be a janitor. The turning point came when we landed our first Fortune 500 client. Meridian Corporate Holdings owned commercial properties across 12 states, and they were hemorrhaging money due to outdated management systems. Their chief operations officer, Sarah Williams, had heard about our work through industry connections and flew to Denver to meet with us personally. The meeting was scheduled at our headquarters, a shared workspace that Jake and I rented for $300 a month. Sarah arrived in a black BMW, wearing a suit that probably cost more than our monthly rent. "I'll be honest," she said, settling into our mismatched conference chairs. "When I heard you were the ones revolutionizing property management, I expected something different." Jake and I exchanged glances. We'd grown accustomed to these reactions. At 21, I looked more like a college student than a business consultant, and Jake still carried himself like the humble janitor he'd been when we met. But Sarah was smart enough to look beyond appearances. After we walked her through our portfolio of case studies and demonstrated our proprietary software, her entire demeanor shifted. "Gentlemen," she said, closing her laptop with a decisive snap, "I don't care if you're operating out of your parents' garage. What you've built here could save us millions." The Meridian contract was worth $2.8 million over 2 years. More importantly, it gave us credibility with other major players in the industry. Within 6 months, we had contracts with 3 more Fortune 500 companies. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. It was time to scale beyond what 2 people could handle. We hired our first employees, not executives or sales managers, but brilliant software developers and data analysts. People who understood that the future of real estate wasn't in bigger buildings or flashier offices, but in smarter systems and more efficient processes. Our team grew from 2 to 12 to 37 employees within 18 months. We moved from the shared workspace to a proper office, then to a larger office, then to a converted warehouse where we could house our growing server infrastructure alongside our expanding team. The interesting thing about rapid growth is how invisible it can be from the outside. My parents knew I was still working in technology. They'd given up trying to understand exactly what that meant, but they had no idea about the scale of what we'd built. During family gatherings, which had become increasingly rare and tense, they would make passing comments about my computer hobby or ask when I was going to get serious about my career. My cousin Jessica, who worked in marketing for Morrison Industries, would talk about their latest projects while my parents beamed with pride. "We just broke ground on the Riverside Commons development," my father announced during Christmas dinner in year 4. 42 luxury condos, projected to generate $8 million in revenue over the next 3 years. That's wonderful, Dad, I replied, genuinely pleased for their success. And what about you, Marcus? My mother asked with that particular tone that suggested she already knew she wouldn't like the answer. Still playing around with computers? I could have told them that PropTech Solutions had just closed $15 million in contracts for the following year. I could have mentioned that we were being courted by venture capital firms offering valuations that would make their heads spin. Instead, I just smiled and said, something like that. The truth was, Jake and I had discovered something extraordinary. We weren't just building software, we were creating an entirely new model for how real estate businesses could operate. Our clients weren't just saving money, they were fundamentally transforming their capabilities. Take our work with Rocky Mountain Properties, a regional development firm that had been struggling to compete with larger companies. Before implementing our systems, they could manage about 6 projects simultaneously. After our optimization process, they were successfully handling 23 projects with the same core team. But the real breakthrough came when we started acquiring struggling real estate companies instead of just consulting for them. The idea emerged from a conversation with David Park, the owner of a small commercial property management firm that was drowning in debt. David had excellent relationships with property owners and tenants, but his operational systems were so outdated that he was spending more on administrative overhead than he was generating in profit. I've got 47 commercial properties under management, he explained during our initial consultation, but I'm about 6 months away from bankruptcy. The paperwork alone is killing me. Instead of charging David our usual consulting fee, Jake and I made him an offer. We would completely restructure his business using our systems and processes, eliminate his operational inefficiencies, and automate 90% of his administrative tasks. In exchange, we wanted a controlling stake in his company. David agreed immediately. Within 8 months, his company went from losing money to generating a healthy profit. More importantly, we'd created a template for acquiring and optimizing other struggling real estate businesses. This became our new strategy. We would identify promising companies that were failing due to operational inefficiencies, acquire them at discounted valuations, implement our technology solutions, and transform them into highly profitable enterprises. Over the next 2 years, we acquired 11 different real estate companies across Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico. Each acquisition taught us something new about the industry and allowed us to refine our systems further. But we were still operating under the radar. The real estate industry is surprisingly insular, and most of our acquisitions were small to mid-sized companies that didn't generate much attention in the broader market. That changed when we acquired Pinnacle Development Group. Pinnacle had been one of the most respected commercial developers in the Rocky Mountain region, until a series of bad investments and cost overruns had pushed them to the edge of bankruptcy. They had prime development contracts, excellent relationships with city planners and contractors, and a reputation for quality work. What they didn't have was the operational efficiency to execute profitably. The acquisition process took 4 months and cost us $12 million, but it was worth every penny. Pinnacle gave us credibility in the high-end commercial development market and access to contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. More importantly, it put us on my parents' radar for the first time. Morrison Industries had been competing with Pinnacle for certain contracts over the years. When news of the acquisition appeared in the Denver Business Journal, my father called me for the first time in months. "Marcus," he said, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. "I saw something in the Business Journal about a tech company acquiring Pinnacle Development." The company name sounded familiar. PropTech Solutions. That's not your little computer business, is it? For a moment, I considered continuing the charade. It would have been easy to deflect, to let him think it was a coincidence. But something in his tone told me he already suspected the truth. "Actually, Dad, it is." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. PropTech Solutions is your company? He finally asked. Jake and I are the co-founders, yes. Another long pause. Marcus, Pinnacle Development Group was worth $30 million before they hit financial trouble. How did you... He trailed off, unable to finish the question. It's complicated, I said. Maybe we should have lunch sometime and I can explain what we've been building. But my parents weren't ready for that conversation yet. They needed time to process the idea that their son's cheap job had somehow generated enough capital to acquire one of their industry peers. What they didn't know, what nobody in the industry knew yet, was that Pinnacle was just the beginning. By year 5, PropTech Solutions had quietly become one of the largest real estate technology companies in the Western United States. We owned 14 different companies, employed over 200 people, and were generating $87 million in annual revenue. Our success had been built on a simple principle. While everyone else was focused on building bigger and flashier, we were focused on building smarter and more efficiently. We could accomplish more with fewer resources because we had better systems. But the real opportunity was still ahead of us. Morrison Industries, my parents' company, had been struggling for the past 18 months. Construction costs were rising, environmental regulations were becoming more complex, and they were losing contracts to competitors who could deliver projects faster and cheaper. During a rare family dinner, I watched my father push food around his plate while discussing their challenges. The industry is changing too fast, he admitted. These younger companies are undercutting our bids, finishing projects ahead of schedule. I don't understand how they're doing it. My mother nodded grimly. We've had to let go of 23 employees this year. If things don't turn around, soon... She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Morrison Industries, the company my parents had built over 30 years, was in serious trouble. That night, I made a decision that would culminate everything Jake and I had been working toward. It was time to make an offer they couldn't refuse. The next morning, I arrived at our PropTech headquarters before dawn. Our building, a converted automotive plant that we'd purchased and renovated, hummed with activity even at 6 a.m. Our development teams in different time zones meant someone was always working, always innovating, always pushing our technology forward. Jake was already in his office, surrounded by financial reports and feasibility studies. Over the years, he'd evolved from the brilliant but scattered engineer I'd met at Binary Beans into one of the sharpest business strategists I'd ever encountered. I've been thinking about Morrison Industries all night, he said without looking up from his laptop. If we're really going to do this, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. I'd been thinking the same thing. Acquiring my parents' company wasn't just a business decision, it was personal. We couldn't approach it with the same casual confidence we'd used for other acquisitions. I want a complete analysis, I told him. Financial records, operational efficiency reports, market position, everything. But we need to do it quietly. Jake nodded. I'll put together a discreet investigation team. People who understand real estate but aren't connected to the local industry. We can't risk getting back to your parents before we're ready. Within a week, we had assembled what we called our shadow audit team. 3 forensic accountants from Chicago, 2 operational efficiency experts from Seattle, and a market research specialist from Boston. None of them had any connections to Denver's real estate community. What they discovered was both worse and better than I'd expected. Morrison Industries was in deeper financial trouble than my parents had admitted, even to themselves. They were carrying $4.2 million in debt across multiple projects, their profit margins had shrunk to less than 3%, and they were projected to lose money for the 3rd consecutive quarter. But the company's underlying assets were incredibly valuable. They owned prime real estate across Colorado, had established relationships with every major contractor and supplier in the region, and maintained an impeccable reputation for quality work. The problem wasn't the foundation of their business. It was how they were operating it. Classic case of good fundamentals, terrible systems, explained Monica Rivera, our lead forensic accountant, during a video conference call. They're still using paper-based project management, manual scheduling, and separate software programs that don't communicate with each other. Their administrative overhead is nearly 40% higher than industry standards. The inefficiencies were staggering. Morrison Industries was spending more money on project coordination than most companies their size spent on materials. They had 3 different employees manually tracking the same information in different systems. Their billing process was so convoluted that they were consistently underbilling clients and missing payment deadlines. "How long would it take us to implement our optimization systems?" I asked. Jake pulled up his project timeline software. "If we had full cooperation and access, maybe 6 months for complete transformation. Their existing projects would start showing improved efficiency within 8 weeks. The numbers were compelling. Our shadow audit projected that Morrison Industries could increase their profit margins by at least 200% within the first year of optimization. More importantly, they could expand their project capacity by 150% without hiring additional core staff. But there was a complication I hadn't anticipated. "There's something else," Monica said, sharing a new document on her screen. "Morrison Industries has been approached by 2 other potential buyers in the past 6 months. Both offers were rejected, but—" She paused, highlighting specific sections of financial documents. "Based on these preliminary negotiations, your parents are aware their company is in trouble, but they're not aware of how much trouble. They rejected offers that were actually quite reasonable given their current situation. This changed everything. If my parents were already fielding acquisition offers, they might be more open to a sale than I'd assumed. But they also might have unrealistic expectations about their company's value." "What were the previous offers?" I asked. $18 million from Rocky Mountain Construction Group, $22 million from Colorado Development Partners. Jake whistled softly. "Those are fair offers given their debt situation. I wasn't surprised my parents had rejected them. Morrison Industries had been worth at least $40 million at its peak. Accepting half that value would have felt like admitting failure. But PropTech Solutions wasn't Rocky Mountain Construction or Colorado Development Partners. We weren't just buying a company, we were buying a company we could transform. Run the numbers on a $35 million offer," I told Monica. "Full acquisition, immediate implementation of our systems, projected ROI over 3 years. The calculations took her 20 minutes. When she shared the results, even Jake looked impressed. $35 million would give us complete control, Monica explained. After debt consolidation and operational optimization, the company would be profitable within 9 months. Conservative projections show $180 million in revenue over the next 3 years, with profit margins averaging 18%. But the most interesting projection was the long-term strategic value. Morrison Industries wasn't just another real estate company. It was the key to dominating the Colorado market. Their client relationships, combined with our technology and efficiency systems, would create a regional monopoly that other companies couldn't compete with. "There's one more thing we need to consider," Jake said quietly. "Your parents built that company from nothing. It's not just a business to them, it's their legacy." He was right. This wasn't like our other acquisitions where we were rescuing struggling businesses from owners who were ready to walk away. My parents had invested 30 years of their lives in Morrison Industries. Even if they were facing financial difficulties, convincing them to sell would require more than just a good offer. We needed a strategy that would make the acquisition feel like salvation rather than defeat. That's when I had an idea that would change everything. Instead of approaching Morrison Industries as PropTech Solutions, a tech company they barely understood, what if we approached them as Morrison Chen Enterprises, a joint venture between their expertise and our resources? "Here's what I'm thinking," I explained to Jake. We don't acquire Morrison Industries. We merge with it. My parents keep their company name, maintain operational control of construction projects, and retain their management roles. But we provide the capital investment, technology infrastructure, and efficiency systems that will make them profitable again. Jake leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. That's actually brilliant. They get to keep their legacy and their dignity, while we get access to their market position and client relationships. Exactly. And here's the best part. They don't need to know that PropTech Solutions is funding the entire operation. We create Morrison Chen as a separate entity, position it as a partnership between equals, and gradually reveal the scope of our involvement as they see the results. The more we discussed it, the more sense it made. My parents would never accept charity from their son, but they might accept a partnership with a successful business that respected their expertise. Over the next month, we developed the complete merger proposal. Morrison Chen Enterprises would be a 50-50 partnership on paper, but PropTech Solutions would provide the initial capital investment, technology infrastructure, and operational optimization. Morrison Industries would contribute their existing projects, client relationships, and construction expertise. The projected results were extraordinary. Within 2 years, Morrison Chen would be the largest construction and development company in Colorado, with projected revenues exceeding $120 million annually. But first, I had to convince my parents to take a meeting. The phone call I'd been avoiding for weeks couldn't be postponed any longer. On a Thursday evening in October, I dialed my parents' home number and waited as it rang. Hello? My mother's voice sounded tired. Hi, Mom. It's Marcus. A pause. Marcus, this is unexpected. I was wondering if you and Dad might be available for lunch this weekend. There's something important I'd like to discuss with both of you. Another pause, longer this time. What kind of important? I took a deep breath. It's about Morrison Industries. I think I might be able to help. The silence stretched so long I could hear the television playing in the background. Finally, my mother spoke. Help how? I'd prefer to explain in person, but I have a business proposal that could solve your current challenges. When she finally responded, her voice carried a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Saturday at noon. Antonio's restaurant on 5th Street. But Marcus... Yes? Don't get our hopes up if this is just some pie-in-the-sky computer scheme. We're dealing with real problems here. After I hung up, Jake looked at me with a mixture of excitement and concern. You realize, he said, that once you walk into that restaurant, everything changes. Win or lose, your relationship with your parents will never be the same. I nodded, understanding the weight of what we were about to attempt. I know. But they're going to lose the company anyway if they don't accept help. At least this way they have a chance to save it. Saturday was 3 days away. 3 days to finalize our proposal, prepare our presentation materials, and get ready for the most important business meeting of my life. Saturday arrived with an unseasonable snowstorm that blanketed Denver in 6 inches of fresh powder. I sat in my car outside Antonio's restaurant, watching my breath fog the windows while I reviewed our presentation materials one final time. The folder beside me contained documents that would either save my parents' company or destroy what remained of our relationship forever. Financial projections, merger proposals, technology implementation timelines, and a cashier's check for $5 million as proof of our serious intent. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Remember, you're not just their son in that room. You're a business leader who's built something extraordinary. Don't let them diminish what you've accomplished. At exactly noon, I walked into Antonio's and spotted my parents at a corner table. They looked older than I remembered, and there was a tension in their posture that hadn't been there during our last family gathering. Marcus, my father stood to shake my hand, his grip firm but brief. You look good. Successful. My mother remained seated, studying me with the same analytical expression she used when reviewing financial reports. "So," she said as I sat down, "tell us about this business proposal." No small talk, no catching up. They were treating this like any other business meeting, which was probably for the best. I opened the folder and placed a bound presentation document in front of each of them. "Before I explain the proposal, I need you to understand something about PropTech Solutions that might surprise you." My father glanced at the cover page, which displayed our company logo and the subtitle, Real Estate Technology and Acquisition Services. "You mentioned PropTech when you called about the Pinnacle acquisition," he said. "I've been doing some research since then." "What kind of research?" I asked, curious about what he'd discovered. "The kind that shows your little computer business has been acquiring real estate companies across 3 states, my mother said, her tone sharp with accusation. "Did you think we wouldn't find out?" I should have expected this. My parents hadn't built a successful business by being naive or unprepared. "What exactly do you know?" I asked. My father opened a folder of his own. Clearly, I wasn't the only one who'd come prepared. PropTech Solutions has acquired 14 real estate companies in the past 3 years. Total acquisition costs of approximately $180 million. Current estimated value of holdings, over $300 million. The numbers were accurate, if conservative. Our actual portfolio was worth closer to $400 million, but I wasn't going to correct them. "So when you called about helping Morrison Industries," my mother continued, "you weren't offering help as our son. You were scouting us as your next acquisition target." The hurt in her voice was unmistakable. This was exactly the scenario I'd hoped to avoid. "That's not true," I said firmly. "Yes, I've been researching Morrison Industries as a potential business opportunity, but I'm here because you're my parents and your company is in trouble." "Our company," my father's voice rose slightly, "has been profitable for 28 of the 30 years we've been in business. We've weathered recessions, market crashes, and industry changes that killed dozens of our competitors. And now you're projected to lose money for the 3rd straight quarter," I replied, pulling out Monica's financial analysis. "You're carrying $4.2 million in debt, your profit margins are under 3%, and you've had to lay off nearly 40% of your workforce." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. My parents exchanged a look that spoke of private conversations and difficult decisions. "How do you know our financial details?" my mother asked quietly. "Because I had them analyzed by professionals, not to exploit your situation, but to understand how to fix it." I opened my laptop and connected it to the small projector I'd brought. The first slide of my presentation appeared on the white wall beside our table, showing Morrison Industries' financial trajectory over the past 5 years. "Your company isn't failing because of bad management or poor reputation," I explained. "It's failing because the industry has changed faster than you've been able to adapt. Construction costs are rising, project timelines are getting more complex, and clients expect efficiency levels that are impossible to achieve with manual systems." The next slide showed comparative analysis between Morrison Industries and PropTech's optimized companies. Every company we've acquired has had similar problems. Great fundamentals, terrible systems. The difference is that we've developed technology, solutions that can transform operational efficiency by 200 to 400%. My father leaned forward, studying the numbers on the screen. "These projections seem unrealistic." "They're based on actual results from our existing portfolio," I replied, advancing to case studies. Rocky Mountain Properties increased their project capacity by 180% with the same core staff. Desert Vista Development reduced their administrative overhead by 67%, while handling twice as many projects. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through our complete proposal for Morrison Chen Enterprises. Joint venture structure, technology implementation timeline, projected revenue growth, and most importantly, how they would maintain control of day-to-day operations while we provided the capital and systems to make them profitable again. When I finished, my parents sat in stunned silence. Finally, my mother spoke. "You're proposing to invest $35 million in our company?" "I'm proposing to partner with you," I corrected. "Morrison Chen would be a 50-50 joint venture. You bring your expertise, relationships, and existing projects. We bring capital, technology, and operational systems." "And what's your real motivation here?" my father asked. "Because this doesn't make sense as a pure business decision." I closed the laptop and looked directly at both of them. "My motivation is that you're my parents, and I don't want to watch you lose everything you've built. But yes, it also makes sense as a business decision. Your company has incredible potential. It just needs the right systems to unlock it." My mother was studying the financial projections with the focused intensity I remembered from my childhood. These efficiency improvements, are they really possible? Not just possible, guaranteed. We've never had an implementation that didn't exceed projected efficiency gains. And we would maintain operational control? Complete control. Your name stays on the building. You make all construction decisions. You manage client relationships exactly as you always have. The only thing that changes is that you'll have better tools to do it with. My father was quiet for a long moment, then asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why didn't you tell us about this years ago? About what you'd built? About how successful you'd become?" The honest answer was complicated. "Because every time I tried to explain what I was doing, you dismissed it as a hobby or a phase. You were so convinced that my cheap job was a mistake, that you never gave me a chance to show you what it was actually becoming. So you let us worry about you," my mother said. "Let us think you were wasting your potential." "I was protecting myself," I admitted. "From your disappointment, from your criticism, from having to defend something I believed in to people who couldn't see its value." The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd had in years. My parents admitted they'd been too quick to dismiss technology as unimportant to their industry. I admitted I'd been too proud to share my successes when they might have helped bridge the gap between us earlier. But the emotional reconciliation would have to wait. We had a business decision to make. "We need time to think about this," my father said finally. "And we need to review these documents with our attorney and accountant." "Of course. But I need you to understand the timeline we're working with. Your current cash flow projections show serious problems starting in January. If we're going to move forward with this partnership, we need to begin implementation within the next 6 weeks." I pulled out the cashier's check and placed it on the bord table. "This is $5 million as a good faith deposit. If you decide to move forward, it becomes the first installment of our investment. If not, you keep it anyway to help stabilize your cash flow while you explore other options." Both my parents stared at the check like it might disappear if they looked away. "Marcus," my mother said softly, $5 million is what I made last month," I finished. "Mom, Dad, I know this is hard to accept, but PropTech Solutions generated over $87 million in revenue last year. We can afford to save your company." The weight of that statement settled over the table like a blanket. My parents had spent 6 years thinking their son was working a minimum wage job, while he'd actually built a business empire that dwarfed their own company. "We'll call you by Tuesday," my father said, his voice hoarse with emotion. As I packed up my presentation materials, my mother asked one final question. "Are you happy? With what you've built? With the choices you made?" I thought about the question seriously before answering. "I'm proud of what we've accomplished, but I would have been happier if I could have shared it with you along the way." Walking back to my car through the snow, I realized that regardless of their decision about the partnership, something fundamental had changed. My parents finally understood what I'd been building all these years. The question now was whether it was too late to build something together. Tuesday came and went without a phone call. Wednesday passed in silence. By Thursday morning, I was beginning to accept that my parents had rejected the proposal. Jake found me staring out my office window at the Denver skyline, watching construction cranes move against the gray November sky. Maybe they need more time, he suggested. This is a massive decision for them. Or maybe they'd rather lose the company than accept help from their disappointing son, I replied, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. That afternoon, everything changed. My assistant knocked on my door with an expression I'd never seen before, part confusion, part excitement. "Marcus," she said, "there are 2 people here to see you. They say they're your parents, but they're asking to speak with the CEO of PropTech Solutions." I found my parents in our main conference room, sitting stiffly in chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. They were both wearing their best business attire, my father in the navy suit he reserved for major client meetings, my mother in the charcoal dress she'd worn to close their biggest deals. "Mom, Dad," I said, closing the door behind me. "This is unexpected. We wanted to see it," my mother said without preamble. "Your company, what you've actually built." I looked around the conference room with fresh eyes, trying to see it as they would. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver, a 40-person conference table made of reclaimed hardwood, screens displaying real-time data from our various properties across 3 states. The quiet hum of success that money can't buy but achievement creates naturally. "The building alone must be worth $15 million, my father observed. 18, actually. We bought it for 12 and put $6 million into renovations." "And how many people work here?" "At this location, about 130. Total across all our companies, just over 400. My mother walked to the window and stood looking out at the city. "Do you remember when you were 12 and you asked me what success looked like?" I remembered. We'd been driving past the downtown business district, and I'd asked why some buildings were nicer than others. "You told me that success was being able to choose where you worked instead of having to take whatever job was available. And now you own the building," she said softly. My father had been examining the awards and recognition plaques that lined one wall. Colorado Business Leader of the Year, Technology Innovation Award, Entrepreneur of the Decade. He turned to face me. "When did you win these?" "Various years. The Innovation Award was 2 years ago. Business Leader was last year." We never knew. The simple statement carried the weight of 6 years of missed celebrations, unshared achievements, and a family divided by misunderstanding. "I stopped telling you about awards after you missed my college graduation," I said quietly. "It seemed easier than being disappointed when you weren't interested." The conversation was interrupted when Jake appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I thought you might want to know. The Meridian project just came in 43% under budget and 2 weeks ahead of schedule. The client wants to expand their contract." After Jake left, my father asked the question I'd been expecting. "Is that typical?" "For our optimized companies, yes. We've never had a project come in over budget since we implemented our full system. Integration. Never? Never. Our project management software tracks every variable in real time: materials, labor, timeline, weather delays, permit issues. Everything is connected and automatically adjusted. When a problem develops, we know about it before it becomes costly." My mother had returned to the table and was studying the financial documents I'd left from our Saturday meeting. "These efficiency improvements you showed us, they're really this dramatic?" Instead of answering with words, I led them to our operations center. 24 monitors displayed live data from construction sites, property management offices, and development projects across our entire portfolio. Employees at workstations monitored progress, coordinated resources, and solved problems with the kind of precision that had once seemed impossible in the construction industry. "This is how we manage $400 million in active projects," I explained. "Every site, every project, every dollar is tracked in real time." My father watched as one of our coordinators identified a potential material delivery delay at a site in Phoenix and automatically rerouted supplies from our Denver warehouse to prevent any timeline impact. How long would that kind of coordination have taken you at Morrison Industries? I asked. 3 phone calls, 2 hours of research, and probably a day's delay, he admitted. Our system handled it in 4 minutes. We spent the next hour touring the facility. I showed them our software development labs, where teams of programmers work to improve our systems. The Financial Analysis Center, where our accountants managed cash flow for dozens of companies simultaneously. The Client Relations Department, where account managers maintained relationships with property owners and tenants across 3 states. This isn't just a business, my mother observed. It's an ecosystem. That's exactly what it is. Every company we acquire becomes part of a bar network that makes all the other companies stronger. When we returned to the conference room, my parents sat quietly for several minutes, processing what they'd seen. Finally, my father spoke. "We've made our decision about the partnership proposal." My heart rate accelerated, but I kept my expression neutral. "And?" "We want to accept, but we have conditions." I nodded, waiting. "First, we want the partnership to be 60-40 instead of 50-50. Morrison Industries brings more local market knowledge and established relationships than we initially credited. That's reasonable. Second, we want our employees who were laid off to have first priority for rehiring as the company grows." "Absolutely." "Third," my mother continued, "we want to understand every system you implement before you implement it. We're not interested in being silent partners in our own company." I wouldn't want it any other way. My father leaned back in his chair. "Then we have a deal. But Marcus, I need to say something else." I waited. "I owe you an apology." "We owe you an apology. We spent so many years worried about what you weren't accomplishing that we completely missed what you were accomplishing." "You built something extraordinary," my mother added. "And you built it despite our doubts, not because of our support. I'm proud of you, but I'm also ashamed that it took us this long to see it." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had. My parents asked detailed questions about our business model, our growth strategy, our long-term vision. For the first time in years, they were genuinely interested in my work, not as a parent tolerating a child's hobby, but as business professionals recognizing innovative excellence. "There's one more thing," I said as our meeting was wrapping up. "The merger documents will show PropTech Solutions as the majority investor, but I want you to know that Jake and I personally own 78% of PropTech Solutions." The implication sank in slowly. "Are you telling us," my mother said carefully, "that you're not just partnering with our company, you're essentially buying it?" "I'm telling you that your son now owns the company that used to compete with you for contracts," I replied. "Morrison Chen Enterprises will be successful because it will have the resources of an organization worth nearly $500 million backing it." The room fell completely silent. My father was the first to speak, and when he did, his voice carried a mixture of amazement and something that sounded like pride. "Marcus, when you took that job with Jake 6 years ago, what were you hoping to accomplish?" I thought about the question seriously. Honestly, I was hoping to prove that I could be successful doing something I was passionate about. I never imagined it would grow this large. "And what do you hope to accomplish now?" "I want Morrison Chen to be the most successful construction and development company in Colorado. But more than that, I want to work with you instead of in spite of you." 6 months later, Morrison Chen Enterprises held its grand reopening ceremony. The company that had nearly failed was now projecting $47 million in revenue for its first year of operation. We'd rehired all the employees who'd been laid off, plus 36 new hires. Our efficiency improvements had attracted clients from as far away as Texas and California. My parents stood at the podium, addressing a crowd of business leaders, employees, and local media. But the moment I'll never forget was when my father concluded his speech by saying, "This company's success is built on the foundation that my wife and I established 30 years ago, enhanced by technology and systems that our son Marcus developed. Over the past 6 years, we're proud to be partners in Morrison Chen Enterprises, and we're even more proud to finally understand what our son has accomplished." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, my mother found me standing outside the building, looking up at the new Morrison Chen sign illuminated against the night sky. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd supported your decision from the beginning?" she asked. "Sometimes. But I think things worked out the way they needed to. I had to prove to myself that I could succeed without your approval before I could succeed with it. And now? Now we get to find out what we can build together." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 years earlier, I'd chosen what my parents saw as a cheap job over their vision of success. Tonight, that choice had not only saved their company, it had brought our family back together. Sometimes the most expensive mistakes turn out to be the most valuable investments. And sometimes the job that looks cheapest from the outside is actually worth more than anyone imagined. 2 years after the Morrison Chen merger, I received a call that would close the circle on everything we'd built. Jake burst into my office with news that Rocky Mountain Construction Group, one of the companies that had tried to buy Morrison Industries for $18 million, was facing bankruptcy. Their outdated systems and bloated overhead had finally caught up with them. "They're asking if we're interested in acquiring their assets," he said, unable to hide his grin. The irony is incredible. Within 3 months, we'd absorbed Rocky Mountain's client contracts and skilled workforce into Morrison Chen. The company that had once tried to buy my parents' struggling business for a fraction of its worth was now part of our expanding empire. But the real validation came during a Colorado Construction Industry Awards ceremony that fall. Morrison Chen won Company of the Year, beating out firms that had been industry leaders for decades. As I accepted the award, I looked out at an audience that included competitors who had once dismissed PropTech Solutions as just another tech startup. They watched as the janitor's apprentice they'd ignored received recognition for revolutionizing their entire industry. My parents were in the front row, beaming with pride that felt genuine for the first time in years. After the ceremony, my father pulled me aside. "You know what the best part of tonight was?" he asked. "What's that?" Watching Richard Hayes from Continental Development realize that the kid he refused to hire 3 years ago now owns half the projects in Denver. We both laughed, but there was something deeper in his expression. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. Your mother and I have been talking, and we want you to know that Morrison Chen isn't our legacy anymore. It's yours. We built a good company, but you transformed it into something extraordinary." The conversation was interrupted when Monica Rivera approached with champagne and congratulations. She'd become our chief financial officer after the merger and had been instrumental in our continued growth. 37% revenue increase this quarter, she announced. "We're officially the fastest-growing construction company in the Rocky Mountain region." Later that evening, at the after-party, I found myself in conversation with a young entrepreneur who reminded me of myself 6 years earlier. She was passionate about sustainable building materials, but struggling to get established developers to take her seriously. "The old guard doesn't understand innovation," she complained. "They're too set in their ways to see how much money they're leaving on the table." "Have you considered starting from the bottom?" I asked. "Sometimes the best view of an industry comes from the ground floor." She looked confused. "You mean take an entry-level job? That seems like a waste of time." I smiled, remembering similar conversations I'd had with Jake years earlier. Not entry-level, foundation level. Find a way to be inside the industry while building something revolutionary on the side. You'd be surprised how much you can accomplish when people underestimate you. As I drove home that night, I passed the office building where Jake and I had started our journey. Binary Beans was still there, still hosting late-night coding meetups for dreamers who thought technology could change the world. Some of them were probably right. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. It was my mother. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said without preamble. "For what?" "For not giving up on us. For saving our company when we didn't even realize it needed saving. But mostly for proving that sometimes parents are wrong about their children's potential." "You weren't wrong about wanting me to be successful," I replied. "You were just wrong about what success would look like. Your father and I have been talking about expanding into renewable energy construction, green buildings, solar installations, sustainable development projects. That's a smart move. The industry is shifting that direction rapidly. We were hoping you might have some thoughts about the technology side of implementation." I smiled, pulling into my garage beneath the house I'd bought in the hills overlooking Denver. "I'd be happy to help. That's what partners do." After hanging up, I sat in the quiet darkness for a moment, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. 6 years ago, my parents had seen my janitorial job as their biggest disappointment. Tonight, they were asking for my business advice on their next major expansion. The transformation hadn't just been about money or success metrics. It had been about proving that passion and persistence could overcome skepticism and doubt. That sometimes the path that looks like failure is actually the foundation for extraordinary achievement. Most importantly, it had shown that families can be rebuilt stronger after they've been broken, if everyone involved is willing to admit they were wrong about something important. As I walked toward my front door, I thought about all the young entrepreneurs who were probably mopping floors somewhere tonight, building something revolutionary while the world slept. Their parents probably thought they were wasting their potential too. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.